They called it the land of the free, but for millions, it was a land of chains. In the shadows of plantations, in the silence of cotton fields, a quiet rebellion began. Not with guns, not with armies, but with footsteps in the dark. A mother carrying her child through the woods. A young man hiding in a swamp for days. A whisper passed between strangers in the night. These were the first sparks of freedom, and they lit the fire that would become the Underground Railroad. This was not a train. It had no tracks, no steam, no whistles. It was a network of courage, built by enslaved people, free black families, sailors, preachers, dock workers, and dreamers. A system powered by secrets and faith, where every mile north was a fight against fear, and every act of escape was a blow against slavery itself. Long before the name Underground Railroad ever existed, black people were escaping slavery by any means they could. As early as the 1600s and 1700s, runaways fled to maroon communities in the swamps, Native American villages, northern cities, and even Canada, Mexico, and Spanish Florida, seeking protection under different colonial powers. They followed animal trails, rivers, and stars. They left behind everything just for a chance to breathe free. At first, these escapes were scattered and solitary, but by the late 1700s, something started to shift. These acts of resistance began to form a pattern, and that pattern became a network. In cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, free black communities began quietly helping runaways find shelter, food, and work. Enslaved people passed along secret messages, songs with coded lyrics, patterns in quilts, and whispered directions in the dark. The network grew stronger. Helpers became conductors. Safe houses became stations. Escaped slaves were called passengers, and the dangerous paths they followed were now known as the railroad. It wasn't called the Underground Railroad until the 1830s, when slave owners noticed that freedom seemed to move as if by magic, invisibly, silently, and always out of reach, hence underground. One of the earliest documented conductors was Levi Coffin, a white Quaker who helped more than 3,000 enslaved people escape. But more importantly, black leaders were building and sustaining the network in ways history often overlooks. William Still, a free black man in Philadelphia, became the central figure in one of the most critical hubs of the Underground Railroad. He recorded detailed testimonies of hundreds of freedom seekers, names, routes, family members, and memories. Other powerful figures emerged. In New York, David Ruggles, a black abolitionist and journalist, rescued over 600 fugitives and founded the New York Committee of Vigilance, one of the first organized black resistance groups in the North. He even helped a young, newly escaped Frederick Douglass find freedom. And while white abolitionists are often the ones highlighted, it was the black community, free and enslaved, that carried the railroad on their backs. They opened their homes, shared what little they had, hid strangers under floorboards, and passed down survival knowledge through generations. In the Deep South, enslaved people ran to the swamps of Florida, Louisiana, or the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia, where they formed maroon settlements. Others fled north toward black-led communities or pushed further into Canada, where slavery was abolished in 1834. Cities like Toronto, Windsor, and St. Catharines became symbols of hope, the last stop on the line. But then came the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. It gave slave catchers the power to seize runaways even in free states and forced everyday citizens to help. Suddenly, the North was no longer safe. The system was pushed further underground. The work became more dangerous. But the resistance didn't stop. It adapted. New codes were developed. New allies stepped in. And more than ever, it needed brave souls willing to risk everything. That's the world Harriet Tubman stepped into. She didn't create the Underground Railroad. She perfected it. She didn't start the movement. She became its face. And the moment she crossed into freedom, she turned back around and began bringing others with her. Here's what most people never learn in school. Harriet Tubman didn't learn about the Underground Railroad from a pamphlet or a preacher. She learned it from people like her, enslaved and free black workers who passed down knowledge in whispers, songs, and secret conversations. And some of the most important sources of that knowledge were black sailors, fishermen, and dock workers along the eastern seaboard. In the Chesapeake Bay region, the water was freedom's highway. The ports of Baltimore, Wilmington, and Philadelphia were full of movement, cargo, timber, oysters, cotton, but also information. Ships came and went, and so did news of uprisings, safe towns, and which white people could be trusted. Black maritime workers, many of them free or semi-free, carried news up and down the coast. Some of them worked on cargo ships, some unloaded goods at night, some navigated shallow creeks and inlets no one else knew, and they became critical messengers in the fight for freedom. They told enslaved people which roads were watched, which towns had station masters, which homes had candle signals in the windows. They smuggled letters, passed codes, and sometimes hid people on ships. Some even ferried fugitives directly from the shores of Maryland or Virginia to safer ports farther north. Harriet Tubman grew up around these men. She worked in timber fields near the waterways. She loaded barrels, cut logs, and moved goods to the docks. She listened. She learned. From them, she began to understand how wide the world really was and how close freedom might be. She realized that escape wasn't just a wild hope. It was a coordinated effort already in motion, and the more she listened, the clearer the path became. These men were not famous. Their names were not recorded in history books. But without their secrets, maps, and quiet defiance, Harriet Tubman might never have found her way. And neither would so many others. The Underground Railroad wasn't just built by preachers and Quakers. It was built by sailors, fishermen, field hands, and ordinary black people who turned their everyday knowledge into a weapon against slavery. They were the first link in the chain, and Harriet Tubman was the one who carried that chain to freedom. Once Harriet Tubman escaped to freedom in 1849, she could have stayed in safety, lived quietly in Philadelphia, or found work in the North, but that was never the plan. Freedom, to her, meant little if her family and people were still in chains, so she turned back. That first trip was a test, returning to Maryland to rescue her niece and children. She had no weapons, no written maps, no guaranteed help, only her memory, her faith, and the knowledge passed to her by sailors, dock workers, and other fugitives who had traveled the path before, and she succeeded. That mission began a new chapter in the Underground Railroad, one where a single woman, barely 5 feet tall, would strike fear into the heart of the Southern slave economy. Over the next decade, Harriet Tubman made an estimated 13 rescue missions, leading at least 70 enslaved people to freedom directly, and guiding hundreds more through the wider network she supported. She used brilliant tactics. She traveled in winter when nights were long and few people were on the roads. She dressed in disguises, sometimes as a man, sometimes as an old woman. She moved by night and hid by day in swamps, barns, and behind church pulpits. She carried a pistol, not to fire at slave catchers, but to keep anyone from turning back and jeopardizing the group. If you go back, she warned, you'll go back dead. Not as a threat, but as a fact of survival. She never lost a passenger. Slave owners were furious. They blamed that black woman named Moses and put a $40,000 bounty on her head, a fortune at the time. But Harriet was always one step ahead. She never stayed in one place long. She changed routes constantly. She relied on the help of black families, churches, and a few trusted abolitionists who risked their lives to protect her and those she carried. Her success wasn't luck. It was mastery. Harriet Tubman didn't just know how to escape. She knew how to lead. She understood strategy. She understood fear. And she knew that freedom was worth facing both. By the time the Civil War broke out in 1861, Harriet Tubman was already a legend among abolitionists and a threat to the entire slave system. But she wasn't done. Freedom wasn't just about escape anymore. Now, it was war. Tubman joined the Union Army, not as a soldier, because black women weren't allowed to enlist, but as a scout, nurse, cook, and spy. And behind the scenes, she became one of the most valuable intelligence assets in the entire campaign. She knew the terrain. She understood the psychology of slaveholders. She had networks stretching deep into the South. Networks built during her years as a conductor. The Union commanders quickly realized they had something no one else did. A woman who could gather intel, organize raids, and inspire loyalty among the newly freed. Her missions weren't just brave, they were strategic. In 1863, Tubman led what would become one of the most remarkable military operations of the entire war, the Combahee River Raid in South Carolina. Working alongside Colonel James Montgomery and the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, a regiment of black Union soldiers, Tubman helped plan the raid, scout the river routes, and gather intelligence from enslaved people in the region. On the night of June 2nd, she guided Union gunboats upriver, avoiding Confederate mines and ambushes. When the attack began, it was not just a military strike, it was a liberation. More than 700 enslaved people were freed that night, many of them boarding Union boats barefoot, carrying nothing but the hope of a new life. Some would later join the Union Army themselves. This made Harriet Tubman the first woman in U.S. history to lead a military operation, and one of the few to see it end in total success. But even after the war, her fight for justice continued. The Civil War was over. Slavery had fallen. But Harriet Tubman's work was far from done. Freedom, she knew, was more than the absence of chains. It meant land, education, dignity, and justice. After the war, Tubman settled in Auburn, New York, where she had purchased land years earlier with help from abolitionist William H. Seward, who would later become Lincoln's Secretary of State. There, she opened her doors to the poor, the elderly, and the formerly enslaved, people with nowhere else to go. With the little money she had, she founded the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, turning her home into a sanctuary for those who had been forgotten. She farmed, she baked, she took in boarders, and she kept fighting. She became active in the women's suffrage movement, working alongside leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Emily Howland. But even there, she found herself fighting two battles, one for gender and another for race. Black women were often pushed to the margins, even in the struggle for women's rights. Tubman reminded them that black women had been on the front lines of liberation long before many white women took up the cause. Despite her service to the Union, Tubman never received a regular military pension. For years, she fought Congress just to be recognized and compensated for her wartime work, a struggle that drained her finances and health. She lived in poverty, surviving on donations, speaking engagements, and the small income she earned from her land and supporters, but she never stopped giving. Tubman died in 1913, surrounded by friends and family. Her final words were, "I go to prepare a place for you." Harriet Tubman was more than a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was a symbol of resistance, proof that one woman with faith and courage could shake an entire system. She didn't wait for freedom to come. She went out and made it happen, again and again. The Underground Railroad wasn't just a route north. It was a movement built on trust, sacrifice, and the will to be free. Tubman's legacy lives in every act of courage today, every fight for justice, every voice that refuses to be silent. She showed us that freedom is not given, it's claimed, and even in the darkest times, we are never without power. All we have to do is keep moving forward. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.